I'm Louis Warren, and I teach at UC Davis, and I'm a Carson Fellow. My research topic is a Native American religious movement that swept the American West in the early 1890s. It's called the Ghost Dance, and the movement had at its center a vision of an earth renewed. The movement emerged in some very interesting ways. For a long time, we've thought that American Indians devised, that they came up with the movement because, or the movement spoke to them because they were looking to return to the old ways. And that's partly true, but more correctly, the movement emerged because of an environmental crisis in the homeland that it came from. The movement comes from a place called Nevada, which is a very barren, arid state in the far west. And in the 1870s and 80s, there was a mining boom there that caused a lot of deforestation as settlers arrived to build towns made of wood and to shore up the tunnels in the mines with wooden supports. This made life increasingly difficult for American Indian peoples who lived in this state because they depended on nuts from the pine trees, the pine nuts, for food. And as those trees were removed, food got harder and harder to get. You add to that the cattle and sheep and horses that the settlers brought, and they ate the wild grass seed that Indians also relied upon. Indians often fished for freshwater mussels in the rivers, and they fished as well for fish. And as settlers began to irrigate their fields and their pastures with those rivers, diverting those rivers into the fields, they created a lot of erosion which killed the mussels and the fish. So that all that together makes life much more difficult for Indian people, and they increasingly have to go to work for settlers in order to survive. There is a terrible drought that strikes. So that at this point, there is a sense that for Indian people to survive, the world is going to have to be made anew. It's going to have to become a new kind of place. And that sense emerges from the visions of a Paiute Indian man named Jack Wilson, or Wovoka is the Paiute name by which most people knew him. And what happened to Jack Wilson was he was working one day in the mountains, goes the story, and he collapsed. And when he returned to consciousness, he said that he had been taken up to heaven and he had met God, and that God had given him a dance and a sacred code for the people. The people should perform the dance and live by this code, which was don't lie, don't steal, go to work, love one another. And if they did all of this and performed the dance regularly, then they would bring on the new earth faster. The dance is a very simple dance, the way it emerged. The people would hold hands and they would shuffle sideways in a clockwise direction in a circle. And there would be a singer in the middle. And the singer, Jack Wilson, was the singer of these. And in fact, the dance itself differed from other dances that the Paiutes practiced, mostly in its music. The songs were different. And for the dance to happen, you had to have a singer who knew the sacred songs. And Jack Wilson himself had been given these songs during his trances, in his visits with God, so that he could sing all night and not sing the same song twice. And that was critical to the dance. That's how it has to be performed to this day. And this made the dance an all-night spectacle. It was an all-night event. And as the dance spread, as other Indian people came to learn of the dance and to practice it on their reservations further east, it took on new forms, so that among the Lakota Sioux, it became a dance practiced around a central pole with singers in the middle, and then people would whirl faster and faster. And finally, some of them would collapse into trances of their own. And when they awoke, they would tell of the things that they saw, that they had visited heaven, that they had visited God, and that they had met with their deceased loved ones. And they would tell about this glorious afterlife. Sort of a witnessing kind of process, the way you'd find in many evangelical churches today. The Europeans and the American settlers who saw this dance, many of them were not particularly worried by it. But in South Dakota, where the Lakota Sioux had their reservation, there was a great deal of fear that the Indians might be planning some kind of uprising. And most of the people who actually witnessed the dance said that this was not there's no way that you could construe it or understand it as a war dance. But there were very powerful interests in the US government and in the media that worked hard to create a sense of panic and hysteria over the threat of an Indian uprising. And so because of this, the Army descended upon the Pine Ridge Reservation of the Lakota Sioux in South Dakota to stop the dancing. The Army ordered all of the Indian people to come in to the agency, to a central location on the reservation. They ordered them to stop the dancing and to come in, and they would be given food, was the story. But after one group of Miniconjou Sioux surrendered to the Army, Miniconjou Sioux under the chief named Bigfoot, when they surrendered to the Army at a place called Wounded Knee, they were being searched for weapons when somebody fired a rifle, and suddenly, we don't know who, and suddenly the Army opened fire all at once on the almost entirely defenseless Indians in the center. This resulted in what is known as the Wounded Knee Massacre, with somewhere around at least 170 people killed, and perhaps a great many more than that. We don't actually know how many people died at Wounded Knee. But the Wounded Knee Massacre has gone down in history as one of the worst massacres perpetrated by Americans against Indian people. And these were ghost dancers who were massacred, as even some Americans said at the time, that they were massacred for practicing their own version of what is in a sense a kind of Christianity in Indian garb. The dance continued, in fact, after Wounded Knee.